the August Stormwater Management Advisory Committee meeting, and we'll start the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we haven't all been together for a little while, and there are 2 sets of meeting minutes that we have not reviewed and approved. I know back from the June meeting, I think, Regina, you said you had some changes in the May meeting minutes, and
Me?
yeah. Yeah, and of course, none of us probably remember what the May meeting minutes say. If you have anything, let me know. Or if you think of something later, we've gone back and reapproved things before. Yeah, I wrote the minutes, and I'm having a hard time remembering what I wrote.
Maybe the comment was there wasn't enough in there.
Well, if there are no comments on the meeting minutes for our May and June meetings, you want to
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, passes. The minutes for May and June 2017 are approved. Next, I had public comment, general items, but seeing as there is none, we'll move right along to the MS4.
Can we pull up the screens? Great, thank you. So we have tonight all of the different, all 26 of the potential projects that were identified in the draft pollution prevention plan. So we have the upfront material that I think folks heard at the Board of Commissioners meetings. If we can run through that again, if you'd like it to be, for the public purposes or anything. The upfront slides about the MS4 permit.
I think since it's already been recorded on
Yeah.
video, people can also refer
They
back
can-
to that meeting to see the
Exactly.
presentation.
Good, so they can get all the background of what it involves. And so we had, what we had done, and so this was the table as it came out in the draft PRP of the required 10% reduction. It's 307,000 pounds of sediment. So the next task is to identify, and if you'd like me to explain, this is each of the 3 major waterways, each of the streams, using the DEP simplified method and the Township GIS, updated with the Delaware Valley 2015 land use, and we parsed out areas that don't go to the MS4 storm sewer. So based on that, using the impervious areas and DEP's methodology, we came up with pollutant loads for each of the stream segments. And then where BMPs have been built and the township has information that can be documented, we took credit for what pollutant reduction those BMPs are already providing. And then that reduced the net load down to 3.072 million pounds of sediment is the township's current estimated load to the MS4 system, and then you're responsible for a 10% reduction in this 5-year permit. So 10% leaves us with 307,000 pounds of sediment to be managed in different projects over the next 5 years. So the next task is to identify potential projects, what their potential load reduction is, and then develop associated cost. We don't have costs yet. We have pollutant loads for the different projects and the types of projects. So what I have in this PowerPoint presentation just talks about the types of projects, and we're really focusing as much as we can on basin retrofits because that's a good cost-effective measure, and it's generally a doable project in a limited time frame. as well as stream restoration. And we also looked at the projects that were identified in the CH2 flooding study. So where those projects have been identified, we've pulled those in. This gives an overall summary of the projects that are in the draft pollution reduction plan. So there's a total of 25 total projects, I guess. And you can see how they fall out in terms of the watershed they're in. Most of them are in the Darby, 17 projects, your biggest watershed. 1 in Cobbs Creek and 7 projects in the Plymouth Creek, Schuylkill River major drainage area. In terms of types, we've got a lot of basin retrofits. We've got stream bank restoration. You can see how they break out. And then I think an important topic is where they are in terms of public or private property. Although we have 16 on private property, a lot of those are basin retrofits. So they're private property, but they're basins. So hopefully those would be good candidates for retrofits, even though they're, managed by an HOA. So any questions with any of this initial stuff? Pretty straightforward.
The one thing is, for the record, could you explain the difference between the land cover and the sediment loading so that people know?
Yes, that's a great question. Yeah, if people are curious, if we go back to our tables here. So DEP's allowed a couple different ways to estimate your pollutant loading, and one of them is what they're calling the simplified method, where you just look at, is the surface impervious, is it a road, a roof, et cetera, or is it pervious, is it lawn, woods, whatever. And they've just applied strict pounds per acre per year values. One value for all impervious and one value for all pervious. That's not absolutely true. And DEP does let you do other methodologies where you look at the different land use types. And we did run some early numbers, several different ways, parsing, not parsing, different, and found that this was giving us our most effective numbers for Radnor for this initial analysis. So it's literally pounds per acre per year from impervious times the number of pervious acres is your pounds from pervious in terms of sediment load, and then the same thing for impervious. And then we don't have the actual pounds. I don't remember what the numbers are. Do you, Mark? Impervious acre, and I don't know if we put them in the PowerPoint.
Number of pounds per impervious acre. It's, I think impervious is about 18.5.
Yeah.
255.
It's like 10 to 1 pervious.
Yeah,
So it's, and that's a really important point. Yeah, thank you, because managing your impervious surface is going to give you the most pollutant reduction. You want to focus on capturing as much impervious area as possible, because that's where your load's coming from in these calculations. And we have a table later that looks at the different BMPs and how much impervious they're capturing, per in their drainage area and such. So you can look at efficiencies. Does that explain? Yeah.
Yes, because I wanted to point that out because not everyone understands that. As well, when we're looking to revise our stormwater ordinance,
Yes.
simply removing impervious cover throughout the township could help assist in meeting these goals. It
Definitely.
can't achieve it alone, but it could help.
And all of those things can add up. Yeah. So we talked about, so this is sort of the summary, and then the next step that we've been busy with is estimating the pollutant load for each BMP and looking at, we're in the process of developing costs, and we're striving to have initial costs to talk at the Board of Commissioners meeting on Monday. Mark will be here in the hot seat then. So, so we put more practices in the draft PRP than Radnor needs to meet its required permit goal. We overshot because you're going to make choices. So you can see your requirements 307, and we were at 333 potential. But not all projects are equal. So down the bottom in the red box, I'm sorry, 307 and 432. I misspoke. 433. Yeah. And a lot of your load is in the Darby because that's your biggest watershed. So for each of these projects, we have, a general location of where it's in the watershed, the drainage area to the project from the GIS, what the project is, and how much impervious it's capturing and what your load reduction is. So we can scroll through these if you'd like to sort of have a general sense of what's where.
Could I ask Michelle, and if it would please the board, to start with the worst first? So the stream that has the most, that way, because there's so many of them, but if we start
Right.
with the worst one first, and whatever time we spend on that, that might
Sure.
cover quite a bit.
I think we put them in the order, Steve, of Cobb's, then Schuylkill, then Darby, because we have just one practice, bless you, in Cobb's, and then we have I think 6 or 7 in the Schuylkill River, Plymouth Creek, and then the rest are all in Darby. But do you want us, if we can jump right down to Darby if you'd like.
I think that's our biggest, I guess, in general concern from a magnitude standpoint.
Well, the one thing, though, is we do have to note that we don't achieve compliance unless we do every watershed. So,
I'm just looking at the time you have
Yeah.
tonight, and so if we start on the largest one, which is going to be, from a project standpoint, the greatest magnitude, the cost, the greatest magnitude, but yes, it's across the board, and that's what the Meliora plan shows. It goes through each one.
Let me ask you a quick question. So going to the board meeting next week, this is actually for both of you. Are we going to go in with the whole MS4 and the additional projects, or are we looking to the board Monday to see this list of projects and say, okay, we're going to do A, B, and C and not X and Y, or are we just going to submit everything, give us a little flexibility, and then go back in a year if we had to and amend a plan to be a little more specific?
I guess yes to all of the above. So what we're going to do is we're going to meet again Monday internally and try to give a palette of projects to the Board of Commissioners that, and it's a lot, as you can see, it's a lot of projects over a 5-year period. And I mean, there's big questions on, the feasibility of even getting them all constructed in a 5-year period with the permitting, the ones on private property, negotiating with the various HOAs to get that even done. But it's the law, we have to do it. And to present that and then have them give us direction. But as Michelle has said all along, very tight timeline, we need to meet the requirements. So literally, once we submit and we've met our deadline, right back to the drawing board, and we start getting deeper and deeper and deeper into what we need to do.
So then what would be submitted, unless there was some specific project that the board wasn't against? All the projects that are listed here tonight would go into that?
That'll be the board's call.
Okay.
So we're gonna present them and say, this meets the requirement, or here's 30 that overstate, pick one from column A, one from column B to come up with the needed load. It'll be at their discretion how they wish to move forward.
well, I'm curious because at this point, we're already in the public, we're going to public comment. So I would recommend against changing anything at this point because we have the flexibility to change it once it's been submitted. So this way, we're getting public comments on what we're actually submitting rather than changing it and then not having time for another public comment period.
And I'm jumping to the end here. This is a draft table that's still in transition, but we've been working with Steve to sort of look at, this is sort of summarizing where your potential projects fall out and how much they do for you. So for instance, in Darby, the basin retrofits get you to 15% of your pollutant load. So that's probably a good place to start, and they're very cost effective as we're starting to do the numbers. And so you can sort of see how things break out here and might inform decisions about sequencing of projects. So we're still working on finalizing this table. But this was at the end of the, so let me jump back up
Just,
to the.
let me ask a question about that slide.
Oh,
So
sure.
again, for me and for the public, is there a fraction of counting for each of those that leads to that percentage?
Yes, we have a table for each project that says how much pollution load reduction it does. So when we start to add up all the projects that are, say, basin retrofits, existing detention basin retrofits, in the Darby Creek, the ones we've looked at in the PRP get us to 15% of the required sediment load reduction in Darby, and they're going to have they're going to have a cost as well.
But does like a stream restoration give you more bang than basin retrofit? That was my.
Yes. Yes. And so what we're starting to look at is cost per load reduction, and we have some tables that we're not ready to share yet, but we'll be ready, I think, on Monday. But yeah, where to start? So let me jump back up to
Just to further question about the methodology, you picked the basin retrofits because they're the least expensive or the quickest or both?
both. They're
That's what I thought.
cost-effective. The infrastructure's already there, taking your stormwater to one place, so they're cost-effective, and they give you a good pollutant load number, so.
Kind of a quick question on the basin retrofits. Is there any characterization of what that is? I mean, like a forebay, or if there's additional basin capacity, putting in an orifice plate or something?
Well, as you probably know, DEP has said follow the stormwater manual. They haven't given clear guidance on any of the specifics yet, and so that's also informing our recommendations, anticipating there may be changes from DEP in requirements as the permit evolves. But yes, we've assumed the basin retrofits would include a new outlet structure, regrading and replanting of the basin, modifications that might include, various improvements to the structure itself. So we've been pretty consistent on the components that go into basin retrofits, soil amendments.
And that's for your cost estimation. And essentially, you're taking a detention basin and turning it into an extended detention basin.
Essentially. And we're also assuming that there's planting, there's vegetation, and an altered maintenance regime. And we've done a number of them, so we're basing those on construction costs. We have pretty good numbers of what it costs to do basins, so, and they are cost effective. So on that note, the first one in Derby is a basin retrofit in the Portledge subdivision, which, the numbers kind of speak for themselves. And I can go through these kind of quickly, or as quickly or as slowly as you'd like, if you want to talk about, what these are and where they are, or I'll just roll through them.
I think you should just go through them unless you feel like there's some further clarification required.
Okay. These are all basin sub retrofits, and we've met with Steve and your staff to go through a number of the basins, in terms of what are good choices and what.
The Haymarket Basin that was just shown, so that's off of Clyde Road. That's directly upstream from Ithan Creek. And prior to this whole topic ever coming on board, we've already met with the HOA concerning their basin. So it looks like there may be a good possibility of working something out. The carrot would be that an HOA would no longer be responsible for the basin. So they get that off their table. But there is a process. There's going to be indemnification and memorandums of understanding. So 5 years sounds like a long time, but I think the pipeline is going to be a little bit till you can really start cranking these things out.
Cornerstone Basin, that's a pretty big drainage area.
If you
It's
go,
a really good one, actually.
if you go down Bryn Mawr Avenue, southbound Bryn Mawr Avenue from County Line, from the hospital, eventually you're going to cross Mill, and on your right is Ithan, and that's also the creek. Just go right below the Blue Route, and on your left is the massive basin for Cornerstone, which has a old-fashioned low concrete, low-flow channel. And it was built for that subdivision there that's bounded by 320 and Bryn Mawr Avenue. We've never seen much in the way of water through it, other than it's a short circuit. So this, I think, would be a great one on a lot of levels.
And we really like the drainage area. It's a big drainage area. Haviland subdivision? This one has a pretty high impervious, as you can see, 27%. So it's a smaller drainage area, but you can see it gets us 6,000 pounds. So the higher the impervious, the better the pollutant reduction credit. Same thing with, this one is a bigger project. This is something, I don't know if you want to speak to this, Mark. There have been some conversations with Steve and the park staff about potential parks improvements, but this is looking at doing an infiltration bed in Veterans Memorial Park and some other improvements. These have
Steve?
higher cost with them.
Was this something that that Dan talked about? There was some project around Veterans Park. I just wanted to make
Yes.
sure there's a connection.
There is.
Okay.
And where we have used the CH2 projects, the drainage areas and the costs we'll be sharing are all from the work they've already done. So, this is stream restoration.
Just a quick question on that one. Is it also a flood reduction?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Ithan Avenue, the stream restoration, and this is the first stream restoration that you pointed out, Steve, is something that the township has already considered.
So we did do a bond issue for our parks, and this Ithan Creek runs through Ithan Valley Park, and part of that stream is severely eroded. It's affecting, there's a very old wall that runs along Ithan Avenue. So there is a small amount from the park standpoint for that, and it seemed like it would make sense to address this creek. It's highly impaired. We get great return on the dollar for doing this kind of work, and there's already an impetus to start.
And you can see what a big player it is in your 307 total, how important this one is. So, another park project with a potential infiltration bed. So these, more stream restoration, and again, these give us good pollutant reduction in the DEP credits. Another basin retrofit, getting a highly impervious in Devon Square.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I have a
No,
question
please.
for the SWIMAC. So the Warren Philippone parking lot was part of the bond issue for the parks. And I'm in the design phase of that, and basically the parking lot has failed in many places. So I just pose a hypothetical to the SWIMAC, which would maybe go to the Board of Commissioners. Instead of just doing what the normal repair would be, which is basically mill off the entire surface, redo the subgrade, and then pave the lot, perhaps it would be feasible to still do that much with the bond money, but add to that stormwater fund money and get one of our first infiltration parking lots in the town, other than what we have at Clemmacrone on the pads.
I think that's a really good idea, because the stream restoration are great projects environmentally, but they're not really doing anything for flood reduction. So any project where the two overlap that we can get a credit and a flood reduction for, I think is a positive.
My concern at South Devon is that it's very wet. I think the groundwater table is fairly high there, so.
And part of
That
it would
would
be,
be-
I'd have to get some testing done. So it's very hypothetical till we get the test results.
Steve, just to clarify, what exactly would be done?
So right now, we have in the budget, the parking lot's in very bad shape, it ponds, get the survey done, and the standard way I would do it is regrade the parking lot, on paper through finished contours, so we would show the proper contours so the parking lot drained. To achieve that, the surface would be removed and some of the stone base would be removed, and it would be rebuilt like any parking lot. And it would just be impervious surface, it would be great to drive on, and it would be stable. But we're pointing, and that all came about, a year and a half ago when we were doing the bond issue, or 2 years ago. But when you see here that's a viable project, and we already have a start on it from the park standpoint, I mean, I think I'd have to go to the SWIMAC manager, the board.
But is
and
there
see.
storage, or are you just putting it in?
Well, no, there would be, so to Regina's point, you can't do anything for that until we get infiltration testing done. So if, in a perfect world, if we have great rates, There would be. So to give you an example, Paul, at Clem McCrone Park, we have porous paving. Under those paths is a 24-inch clean stone bed wrapped in geotextile. And there's all sorts of ways from there. You can have pipe systems in there. There's a myriad of ways to treat it, but that's the simple way.
And actually, I would support changing out the materials to get infiltration, but as long as we have enough cover over the groundwater depth. Because if the groundwater's deep enough and we just have to get rid of clay soils, it's still probably cost effective.
Right. So I'll keep going through these. I think we'd looked at that one. This is one that's been talked about. The Riverkeeper introduced it, I think, 10 years ago or so, but it has a good drainage area of almost 50 acres and a fairly good pollutant reduction.
Where is the, I mean, in that, where is the impervious? I mean, it's entirely just a forest.
Well, no, the project site is forest, but all of this drainage area here
Oh, I see.
is
I think that
common
includes
to
the farmer's market, doesn't it? The drainage area?
I
Yeah.
believe it does. yeah.
Need we say more?
So it's the drainage area that we're looking to capture. Bob Connor Park, looking at something subsurface potentially, and here we were looking at, you had mentioned the stone storage, Steve, but here we were looking at the storage modules that store a lot more water, closer to 95%.
And both these parks were, and I'm sorry to interject again, so Warren Philippone and Bo Connor Park were pointed out in the 2011 Chagrin Valley study. They were also pointed out in the CH2M Township-wide study. And here we come again, they're pointed out again. So limited township land, and these come up each year.
So that one is on the other side of the trail, is that right, Steve?
It's right here here's where we're tentatively showing.
So the kind of trail, beside the trail system that CH2M had proposed, would that be an alternative to this?
They would be, they're two separate things. So this is about, I'll say, I don't know, 1,000 feet, maybe 1,500 feet south of the trail, whereas what I believe Dan was talking about was closer to, and that kind of comes into play with the West Wayne Preserve. So the West Wayne Preserve is adjacent to the trail. These are south and above grade of the trail, both these parks. But they have a decent drainage area to them.
Oh.
They're two parks by Club Law.
Right, and they're south of the trail. They're not adjacent to it.
So again, I think, at least my interest is where can we get flood reduction as well as,
These two, like I said, so Chagrin Valley called them out for flood reduction. CH2M called them out for flood reduction, both these parks. And Meliora is calling them out for sediment load reduction. So I think exactly what you're saying is possible.
Okay. Another basin retrofit at the Montrose condominiums. So these are all in the same vein. This would actually be a new project, putting in a bioretention area at the Radnor house. We get a pretty good load reduction in drainage area, but the costs go up with the newer systems rather than the retrofits.
Can you go back to that one? That's a pretty steep lawn, right, in that area?
Here, where's my? On the one side. Here.
So you're down at the bottom, or you're up at the?
I believe we're
top?
down at the bottom, but we were also looking at where the piping network could convey water to and where it could fit in topographically. And these are concept level, so.
Yeah, because I don't think anyone actually uses that ground for anything, right? It's just
Okay.
mowed lawn, from what I can, I've never seen anyone on it. So that might be a good
Might be where.
thing to look at.
There's some utilities that go through there, but they can
Okay.
be moved.
But it's not like it's a park or a used space.
No, it's private property. It's
But
all
I mean,
theirs.
they don't really use it for recreational purposes. It's just decorative more than anything.
And where we show a new project like this, when we show a footprint, a size, we're following the DEP guidelines in terms of drainage area ratio to project footprint size. So they're following the design guidelines. Villanova campus improvements. Are these additional ones, Mark? No, these are what's already there. Oh, I know what this is. This is because they're not built yet. They're not, that's why they're included. So this is the Villanova project. So, but it gives you credit, gives you good credit. This one is a big parking lot, and it could do a good load reduction. Our initial costs are also showing this to be expensive, and it's on private property. So these are the factors that'll come into decisions and timing.
So that would be like taking the whole parking lot and making it?
No, this is taking select areas for putting in bioretention areas or retrofitting. I think there was also a small basin. So it was retrofitting a parking lot.
But even so, it was a bit costly, you're saying?
Where you retrofit, the costs are higher than
Yeah.
where you have
Is
a
it because of
basin.
the pipes that are required mostly?
And more structural work.
Yeah.
Yes. So.
We do have some current projects that are going through approval processes, and we're mentioning to them that, you know, if they can help us with our MS4 while they're constructing. So you may be getting contacted by some
That would all help.
project,
Yeah.
you know.
Okay. All right. Same thing, a retrofit at the basin next to Lincoln Financial, the property next door. And I think across, at the subdivision, there were some opportunities for retrofitting basins.
Where was that? Oh.
Yeah. So, and so it's a lot of data to read, and so you can see where we are percentage-wise. Our goal is 10% sediment reduction per stream, and you can see where the projects are taking us. This one in Cobb's is over-designed, but there aren't a whole lot of opportunities in Cobb's, so, and the permit requirements will continue. There'll be more permit requirements next 5-year cycle, so you would essentially be able to bank credit for the future. Then the question is, priorities and implementing them within a 5-year period, and also coming up with maintenance plans. This is the sequence of events and next steps that we'd shared at the Board of Commissioner meetings. So the draft is out, and we need to submit by September 16th and determine the implementation.
Did we go through Cobb's and Schuylkill?
We skipped them. Oh, that's right, because we started in Derby. I can scroll back and do. Let me go back to those, because that would be helpful since there's only one in Cobb's. There it is. Where's the? There we go. So there's not a lot already existing in Cobb's, and there's not a whole lot of opportunities, and we didn't see any good basin retrofit opportunities. But what we did notice is that the Radnor Apartments is a pretty dense area and has good opportunity for bioretention installation along the edges, and all the drainage is coming this way. So that, as you saw, gave us, significantly more.
Can you give us the context, the road down the bottom?
Boy, I don't know. Do you know, Steve?
Yeah, so the Radwin Apartments, the Radwin Apartments, and I get confused between my apartments too. They're off of Bryn Mawr Avenue. Okay, and so this is north of that Cornerstone Basin.
So the horizontal road is Bryn Mawr Avenue, you're saying?
Hang on. I'm having trouble seeing it all, even with the big screen.
Yeah. And I apologize. We've been working at such a pace. We don't have all our graphics labeled.
Oh, I see. Okay, something is the beginning of a label on that one road, but.
If I get my, my big map of this, I could tell you, but the apartments give us a little bit of hope because there's our residents that live around these apartments, and most of these were built, and they predated all our stormwater management. So if we could do some sediment load reduction and help some of our own residents, because it's strictly conveyance at these places, a lot of them, it just goes down the hill into an inlet through a pipe, or it just sheets off. So we looked at some of these.
Well, in this case, you're talking about starting from scratch, right? There's no
There's nothing
infrastructure.
there.
Yeah, that's why I was just curious where it is, because to
There's
give a
storm
sense of
sewers.
the topography.
The topography is.
Haverford Road,
County line / Haverford.
The vertical one is,
and that's Bryn Mawr.
it is Bryn Mawr, okay.
So it's, like I say, it's north of Cornerstone Basin, and I can tell you how to get there. It's near Jack Barak Hebrew Academy. It's all right up in there.
Yeah, I thought I recognized it, but I don't know the names of all the complexes, so I didn't want to make assumptions. It's good for us to even, like, just while we're out and about, take a look at the context.
And in the PRP, there's detailed maps with the storm sewers, such as they're mapped for each of these, so. So this is Cobb's Creek. It's just the one project, but as the table showed, I think it gives you 34% of your requirements, so.
And that project is going to have to be done, correct?
We have to do something in Cobb's, and this is what's proposed in the draft PRP.
And that's the only thing.
Well, unless we come up with something different between now and your revision to the PRP next year.
Yeah, we have the opportunity to revise the plan if something steps up in the meanwhile.
Or if a door closes on us. And that's what we were saying. So we need to submit by the 16th, get this in. And then, and a lot of this, how this was done, Charles, was we have these maps out. You're looking at impervious surface. We have plans from things that were done, and, trying to grab things in that fashion, plus our own local knowledge from our staff.
And I think Cobb's, it's rather limited because there's such a tiny area in the township. You're constricted to that area.
Area in the township that goes to Cobb's, because it goes the opposite direction.
Honestly, I think if it came down to it and this was not feasible, we could probably do some trading, at some point. I think
Potentially.
they would be obviously open to us making that improvement in another area if it was technically infeasible.
Right. But for purposes of meeting your, yeah. So that's Cobb's. And then in the Schuylkill River direct drainage, this is looking at Eastern University, a rain garden, and I think also retrofitting part of the parking lot. Correct, Mark? This was.
Yeah, and we have some options about what we actually do, but it's focused on putting the B&B in the parking lot.
That's up by the library, is that?
This is Eastern's large parking lot, and it's a little lumpy.
Is that by the pool and the sports fields?
I think it used to be Valley Forges, right?
You're correct.
Oh,
That's exactly what it was.
The end point of the famous
I
drainage
have to say
system.
that this one is probably not the best choice because I think it could change use down the road,
That's good to know. And it's also coming in expensive because it's a major retrofit. It's not, although it does have some plumbing that looks like it could work. It's,
When you're looking at parking lots that are in established areas that require that parking, it's probably more reasonable to think they're going to cooperate with us and allow the project. So this one might be a little tricky in that it just changed hands and it's not required for their existing parking requirements.
okay. So these are the things we need to know as the plan revises over the next year.
I mean, the parking lot's empty most of the time, so
Steve,
we're.
yeah, that's what I was going to say. Do you happen to know what vision they had when they acquired that?
We know they acquired it. At one point, one of the utilities company was using it, and that was against our zoning, so they got booted. But basically, it lays empty all the time. I never see anybody in it. I don't know what I haven't been informed of what their plan is, or if there is a plan. So, I mean, if, for whatever reason they bought, if it's going to sit there, it might make a good candidate. If it goes the other way, then obviously not.
I guess I'm looking at it, if I were the landowner, I would not allow you to do this.
So, yeah, there's several of those type things. This is the township parking, so.
Hopefully the township will want to support our projects.
You think so? The lake that is on the other side of that, the little pond, before you get to Eastern University proper, is there something that can be done there? Because there's like, when Regina and I walked around, we saw that wall that just allows water to flow downstream, and we wondered about restoring that area.
I'm sorry, which property are you talking about?
All right, so it's.
Or sometimes they make it an ice rink over there.
Yeah.
It's right next to Fenmore Woods.
The pond at Fenimore?
The
Right
pond
next
at
to the playground.
Fenimore, the stream that comes in, there's that kind of complicated.
Oh, okay.
Right now, it's a wall that water just, goes downstream.
So are you talking about the property across the street that channelized the stream?
By
So-
the Shimoni Bridge that was
Shimoni Bridge
replaced.
was repaired, then there's the second bridge.
Yes, okay.
And then there's the wall that goes.
Understood, yes. Now I know, yeah, it's in between that and the pond, and it is strictly channelized, and maybe that's a project we could look at. We looked at the culvert, and the culvert itself was okay, but I don't say why
The
not.
wall is degrading, that was part of what you had listed in one
Right.
project.
And maybe that's a stream bank restoration that kills, as you're pointing out, which is a great idea, kills two birds with one stone. We take care of a piece of infrastructure, and we get a bonus.
Good. I think we looked at this one. Another basin retrofit, Wood Lane subdivision. Two basins there, and then the North Wayne Field basin retrofit. This one is also a nice load for what it
Is
is.
this something different than what we're,
This is absolutely different than so what's before, or so it was removed from the agenda, but what the board was talking about, what directed us, was to clean, repair, and put in a sediment reduction BMP. This is outside that. And again, looking at land that may be available is how we start to do this, right? So we're looking at maps, and that's how the big Brandywine Realty Trust property, when you look at that from an aerial, all you see is a sea of paving, and it draws your eyes to it. Now, as Michelle pointed out, it's not necessarily the most cost-effective way, but between what we know, the developments we know, the maps, what we had information on, that's how we start to do these. And I'm not saying that the North Wayne Field Basin is something that could occur. It's a possibility. It's noted as a possibility. It's noted as a
Well,
place where you could do a project.
It could even just be that we put in pretreatment, right?
Different levels.
And maintain it.
Does this proposal mean that we're holding up the repair?
No, I think they're mutually exclusive at this point. So the director from the board came a few months ago. The RFP went out, very specific based on the board's direction, and this came out after that. Now, Monday night, this very well may be a topic of conversation. And again, when we pick these, so obviously this is school district property, a lot of these are private property. We don't know that we are able to implement these, but we're noting that this is a property that a project could be done. Here's the type of project you could do. All good questions, though.
Yeah. Okay. Valley Forge Military Academy, again, private property. And this is looking at doing a porous paving and a stormwater bed that would collect water from both the academy and from the street. So it's a mix of public water on private property, so those may or may not be feasible.
Steve, when I was driving up Eagle, and you come around, you go down, then you come around the curve. I noted that there is an area that they're maintaining that is unmowed on the right side as you're going up the hill. And I wondered if that was,
Coming from where you live?
well, going to where I live from, say, King of Prussia Road. And I just wondered if they're doing something, if they're doing something there, would they be amenable to doing something like that somewhere else?
I don't know the exact spot you're talking about, but I think that's a great question, and maybe.
Because, I mean,
that
the
does mean-
grass is like this high, it's unmowed, it clearly hasn't been mowed in a long time. I wonder if they're doing some,
I think that, either that or letting it go, but our project would definitely look nicer. I think I think that's a great idea.
Talking about on like North Wayne Avenue?
no, if you're coming up Eagle, where the entrance into Eastern is, into Cabrini is, and you go up the hill, you kind of go down to that bridge, and then on the right, just before the building, is this big unmowed area. And so maybe, yeah, like this could substitute for that, or,
This is stream restoration in Cohen Park, and it's showing only about 374 feet. But, so as we go through the evolution of this plan and next year's update, you may end up increasing the length of stream restoration here in lieu of other projects. These may be fluid. And then we're
so
into dark.
that would run from where to where?
So where the purple is showing right here, we're proposing in the park area stream bank restoration.
And you chose that because that's township owned, right?
It's township owned, it's got erosion problems. It looked like a place that the township could, work without,
It's very channelized. There's a big masonry wall there.
yeah.
So yeah, it's a good candidate.
Upstream of, what is it, Yolo? Can't remember. Is that private property?
So the stream where Mr. Bergmeyer's talking about, so it comes up behind all the houses on Willow.
Yeah, on Pennsylvania Avenue backside.
Right. And then at one point, it goes under again.
Right.
It goes by the one house that burnt down. I know I sound like I'm saying, look for the cow on the lawn, but yeah, the one house that burnt down, and goes up. And this is all coming, where this goes Poplar and all up by
Yes,
you folks.
yes.
So, I think there's a lot of possibility in there.
I know, well, in talking with some of the residents in that area, I know there's interest in, that stream now has like rocks and everything and old cement block. And so I think there would be interest I don't know who owns it, that's what I'm saying.
Well, they're Wooders of the Commonwealth, but your property line, somebody's property line goes across it, ends in the middle of it, so we would go to those homeowners. And maybe Mr. Bergmeyer's idea is good, and the great thing about it is the stream goes up, it's not real deep, it's not
Right.
hard to work on, the banks are only a few feet, I know that might change your calcs, but it's not something where we have to have huge machinery to do, because we actually went through there
Yeah.
about 6 years ago. So maybe that's something we'll look at extending.
Yeah. I think that people would be amenable to that.
Okay. And then we're into Darby, so I'm going to jump to the end again. Table. Oops.
Michelle, do you want to just touch briefly on the requirements for stream restoration to count for credit?
Well, DEP hasn't been entirely clear on exactly the requirements. So they're basically general requirements with removing and restabilizing the banks. They haven't necessarily required full analysis of stream channel capacity.
So if that's the case, then doing these small little retrofits are fine because you don't have to put a lot of.
Well, yes and no. I think DEP's guidance will be evolving over this
Okay.
permit term, and the permit, will expire in 5 years, and then it'll be renewed with additional requirements. So we would urge consideration of projects that are going to show in-stream water quality improvements, especially if they're immediately, an outfall of a retrofit basin, if that starts to show a better aquatic life distribution. That's where DEP has indicated that their goal is to get in-stream water quality improvements. So if you're showing in-stream water quality improvements, you're going to be meeting the department's goals. And if you're not showing in-stream water quality improvements, even if you're checking the boxes, your permit requirements will never end. So I think some consideration of healthier streams is worthwhile.
I guess my concern about some of these stream restorations is that we won't have the land area to do what they're really looking for us to do
Right.
as a stream restoration, because
Right.
in that location in particular, you just
Exactly.
don't have the
Backyards.
room.
Right, yeah.
So we may never be able to meet what they're looking for in that area. Even though we can make improvements, they won't be what
Be-
the goal of the intention is.
In terms of like width? Okay.
Yeah, because, I mean, a bona fide stream restoration takes space. And in order to really see the results you're talking about, you want to do a significant length as well. So a short little piece like that may prevent some sediment loading downstream, yes, but it's not really going to, like you said,
Improve.
show you those results.
Right, and they're not as clear with the PRPs and the BMP specifics as they are with the TMDL watersheds, which are a little further ahead. So I think they'll be evolving in their requirements. So, any other thoughts on that, Mark? Yeah.
Just that, I mean, what we touched on the last time we presented was that there are some things that might lead. There are some.
Mark Henderson from Meliora, folks, just so you know.
Sorry about that. There are elements of the PRP that might lead you to what look like either cheaper solutions or easier to implement solutions, but everybody needs to give a lot of thought to what are the most effective solutions to the problem, the end goal that we're really trying to achieve.
When they assess those streams, you want more macros.
Yeah, you definitely don't want this to drag on or spend a lot of money on ineffective projects just because they look like they're, going to check the box of the PRP plan. So that's all.
So,
Well, that's why I was thankful when they told us that you can revise your plan, because it would have been unrealistic to think you could put a 5-year plan in place today without having more feedback from them as to what's going to get credit, for one thing. And second of all, the time to assess feasibility of the projects you're proposing.
right, this is a lot to do, so. Which leads to implementing the projects within a 5-year permit term and making decisions about maintenance and maintainability and the cost of maintenance over time. For the
That's a question
types
I
of
had for you.
projects.
What are you envisioning as far as maintenance? Would you think cost effectiveness would be to train in-house staff or to just contract that out? For this, say we were to implement this as proposed.
Yeah, I guess it depends how many projects need what types of maintenance. There's certainly good contractors available now that can do basin retrofit maintenance, things like that, and that know what they're doing in terms of plant species and,
So-
mowing regimes.
Say basin retrofit, what do they do when they do a maintenance?
And I could share a funny story with that if you'd like.
Sure.
Years ago, we worked on, gosh, this goes back to like 2005. We worked on an early basin retrofit for Sidley Basin in East Whiteland, and we had talked to the township about, it was a giant basin they were mowing every week, and we said it'll save the maintenance crews mowing it every week. So it was retrofit as a meadow and revised structure, and there's signage and, a lot of amenities that go with it. And 3 years to get it established, and we're like, great, it's all doing great. And then we got a phone call from the township saying, what did you tell us? Our maintenance guys are out there for hours. And we went out, and it was June, and all the flowers were in bloom. And they were weed whacking around the flowers as if it was Longwood Gardens. So we said, just mow everything. And then that was a lesson to us to give a laminated maintenance plan to the maintenance crews, because no one ever tells the folks on the mowers what to do. So that's a really important point. If you're doing it in-house, you got to tell folks what to do.
And I think not only that, they have to be there while it's being installed alongside and just kind of understand the whole process.
Yes.
I think it would almost be easier to have someone who does the retrofit and then maintains it. That's my, just kind of my guesstimate from the
Yes.
from the scale of what we're talking about. It
And-
might not be worth the training to do get these people up to speed when they have so many other things that they have to care for
Yeah.
already.
Or have a consistency in your maintenance, your BMP retrofits, so they're consistent in how they're maintained, basic kind of standards. So again, this is just a repeat of where we are. So we're in public comment for submission in September, and then I think the real work of making decisions about which projects, time frame, et cetera. Oh, the table's at the end. And then we had shared this at the Board of Commissioners meeting, but I think it's worth discussing over the next year your stormwater ordinance. And right now, your ordinance doesn't necessarily make things better when things are redeveloped unless they can do the groundwater recharge. If they meet the groundwater recharge, things get better. But otherwise, it's just sort of status quo when redevelopment projects happen. And what they did in Philadelphia in 2009 when they did their long-term control plan for their combined sewers and their MS4 area is they negotiated with EPA and DEP, and I'm summarizing here, but they basically looked at the redevelopment rate in the city, and I don't remember what the percentage was, but they said if every project that's redeveloped such that it makes things better, holds the volume, improves the water quality, this is where we'll be in 30 years. And they projected it out 30 years and had those conversations with the state. And I don't know where that would go with DEP, but I think it's worthwhile because for Radnor, it's going to give you credit when redevelopment occurs. I don't know what your redevelopment rates are, but when big projects come in, if they can add to your tally, such as the Villanova project is doing, we're on the right track, and that's allowing redevelopment as the mechanism, and it's always most cost effective to implement stormwater in a redevelopment rather than a retrofit. That's always where your best financial approach is. So it's something that's probably worth discussion in the context of your ordinance. And there's precedent in the city of Philadelphia, and they haven't, they're continuing to see the development. It hasn't. And there's precedent in nearby Tredyffrin where they have pretty rigorous redevelopment requirements, and it hasn't slowed redevelopment. So something to think about.
I think we're all in support of revising our stormwater ordinance, and we have put some things forth for quite some time.
Yeah.
However, I don't know that using what Tredyffrin uses and what Philadelphia is the right answer.
Right.
It's something to look at. I think, you're so vertical in Philadelphia, it's a totally different story. And you're so impervious, and we're talking about a CSO. It's a completely different situation. Here in Radnor Township, I think in some areas of the township, they're under different requirements than others for reduction of peak rates.
Right.
However, we're starting to try to look at, it's really the main offender is the grandfathered impervious cover. So that's what we really need to attack, and how we do that
Exactly.
needs to be discussed. But if we can somehow use that to our advantage,
Yes.
I don't think that the DEP is going to give us credit for the ordinance, but we'll see the real projects, because we have continual redevelopment here in Radnor.
Right.
So it's not as if once we put that in place, we have to wait around for 10 years to it will happen within a year.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and construction, not just,
And I would I would raise anything that's worth the township's interest with DEP. I mean, it's worth, it doesn't hurt to ask the question.
we can ask. And the
Yeah.
thing is, the goal is to meet the requirements in intent as well as in, legal.
Exactly.
So I think by addressing that impervious grandfathered area, we'll do both.
You're in the right direction, absolutely, yeah. So, and this is the table I had pulled up earlier. This is still, this hasn't been cleaned up yet, but it maybe now, having looked at the individual projects, it has a little more meaning, just sort of summarizing where your load reduction is coming from in terms of the different types of projects. And for Monday night, we'll have costs associated with the different projects, concept level costs. So, are there any other questions or anything else you wanted to go back and revisit, or?
I just want to say, I thought you guys did a great job.
Thank
You had a
you.
really short time span, and you
These guys.
really put together, it was well thought out, and something that I think we
Thank
can
you.
wrap our arms around in a very short time. So, thank you, that was
Much
great.
appreciated, thank you.
Not only with your expertise and your just understanding of where we're coming from as a community, I think that makes sense for us, what you're putting forward.
Thank you.
And I have to say, a lot of this, we anticipated this. A lot of us are paying attention. And had we not had that CH2M study, this couldn't have happened in a practical sense. This would all be fantasy. And these are actually realistic suggestions that I can see
Yeah.
enacting on.
I would agree that the CH2 definitely laid the groundwork. It was very useful for our work. Yeah.
Just to add on that, so Meliora has been a pleasure to work with. Mark has done a yeoman's job on this. He beats us up for information, whether we have it or not. And they've done a bang-up job on this project.
Yeah, we would have never been able to get to where we are without all the groundwork as far as the stormwater infrastructure being in the GIS and all the information that was provided from CH2, because we would have been starting from scratch. We would have not even come close to documenting where all the inlets are in Radnor and stuff like that.
Steve and his crew have
Yep.
scrambled to give us.
Yep. And as far as like existing plans and things like that. So
I'm just curious if you have any idea how are other municipalities making this happen?
well, that kind of goes back to we've tried to give you the most honest and realistic version of what you can do.
So back to the fantasy. Some of them are putting a fantasy
The
plan
other
together.
way,
Yeah.
we could have put together a plan that,
was-
checks the boxes for DEP, and it looks.
But that we would never actually build.
You'd get 6 months down the road, and you'd say, well, I'm trying to build 8,000 linear feet of stream restoration, and you told me it would cost, $50 a linear foot, and I'm getting costs that are $200 or $300 linear foot. What's going on? And I don't know. That's what. That's what got you your plan, and that's what you wanted to hear, that it was only going to cost $500,000. And so that's kind of what we've tried to develop, is give you enough of a palette of different options in different places. Don't just meet the 307,000 pounds to where if you lose a project, now you can't meet the requirements. Because all that goes into it. We know that you're not going to be able to build every single one of those projects on that list. It's just not realistic. So we have tried really hard to get as much of the information in your hands as possible, up in within our time frames and things like that, so that you can make legitimate decisions of directions that you want to go in. Because I can't tell you which project to build. So.
I have a question about cost estimates. Now, I understand, of course, we want you to estimate these things, but of course, you don't have enough data to be that practical. But it's good that you have comparable projects to base it on. However, I am always concerned about putting numbers on our, out for the public because I think you almost drive the cost sometimes. If we say it's going to cost us $1 million to do this project, how likely are we going to get bids for $200,000? So I would love for us to keep that so high level that it's really not going to hurt us in the end when we go to the bidding process. So
And that creates a double-edged sword.
I was just going to say, so.
maybe
if
it's a combined price rather than a individual project price or per whatever price. Because if you start to break it down and cost these things, it hurts us.
I mean, so you can't go so high. If you're so conservative and so high, you need even more
No,
and more
not a high
projects.
cost,
Right.
high level,
Oh,
so general that
That's
you
what this
can't.
is, though, and I think Michelle put that forth, and actually Dan Weibel did on his. So Dan let us all know that what he did in that study was at 50,000 feet. We all knew that. There wasn't, that wasn't brass tacks.
I'm looking at it differently. I'm looking at it as, don't break it down fine enough to figure out where the money's coming from. Just give us the grand total. That type of approach rather than breaking it down.
And with all due respect, I don't know that we can, because we're going to have X projects.
Well, at this time, we're
You're going to have
not.
to choose projects.
At this time, we're not choosing. At this time, we're just giving them the news.
Yeah, but the board's going to want to make an assessment on projects with a ballpark figure.
Yeah,
They're not
and
going to want one
Because the
overall.
original PRP shows more projects than we need. We have a greater sediment load reduction than is required. So you don't want to just say these projects cost this, because we don't need to do every one of them. There does have to be some choice made. And I had asked Meliora to, when we do a project, we look at total project, and that's design, permitting, construction, inspection, and contingency. So, because if we say a project costs $400,000 to construct, when I go and say, oh, by the way, here's my design costs and I have inspection costs, they're going to say, well, where are you going to pay for that, Steve? You told us the project costs $400. So we need to do a total project cost in the aggregate. And I think because we have a plethora of projects, the board will need to make choices. So there will have to be more than just an aggregate price.
Do all the costs and your engineering estimates have to be public, or can that be a decision for the board to take in private so that it doesn't have to hurt us? I mean, at this point, they don't need those numbers because we're not picking them out. So just thinking down the road, I cost estimate so many projects for government entities, and that's never out in the public. There's no way that cost estimate is seeing the light
Yeah,
of
but
day until the bids come in.
Every project we cost estimate goes to the public. Everything we do.
'Cause it's our fee
That's
money.
that's
I mean, our
why
fee
we
money's being
need to
used for
rethink
that.
our policy.
It's all public knowledge. I mean,
The-
whether
the
it be a
pub- the
right to
public-
know.
The bids are public knowledge once they come in.
No, but when we go to the board to request to go to bid, 99% of the time, there's an estimated probable cost of construction. And they want to see that because they need to make that decision.
I'm comfortable with the board seeing that information and also having a cap on what the cost can be. However, like putting all that money out there for the public, it almost ensures that you're not going to get a lower cost.
That would be a board decision. That's a policy decision, whether these things get made public. But honestly, I just anecdotally, I'll tell you, Radnor is very transparent. And I've worked for townships where the board packet, aside from not being public, is not posted, it's not available. Everything we do that goes to the board, every memorandum on a project, on estimated costs. I'm going to give an update on King of Prussia Road emergency force main Monday night. And, that's to the public. Those numbers will be to the public. But that's something that we could bring to the commissioners, but that's, to keep those costs under wraps, that's, I guess, a decision for them and the solicitor. And
Can I ask two questions? Or I'd say a question and a comment. First of all, when you do the cost estimates, is it possible for you to estimate the maintenance going out over time so we have a budget number for that in future years?
It's possible, it's not something we've put into the cost yet.
Steve, I'm just looking at, going in the out years, how the heck do we know how much money?
you bring up a great point, and we're going to have to address it because it's one thing when you have a couple of basin retrofits, but if we own 20,
Dozens, yeah.
it's going to be a big chunk of that budget moving on annually. And as these projects actually start to come to fruition, so things that we're doing now, we're requiring maintenance plans, that the designer has to give us a maintenance plan and has to give us an estimated cost right along those lines. DEP requires us to have a maintenance plan, and we need to be able to fund it. And we need to be able to go to the Stormwater Committee and say, you know, the Haymarket Basin, we're estimating, and it's not a straight line. So in the beginning, when all the plants are small, it's kind of hard to discern. It's a lot of work in there. And then once it gets established, it's less work. But, you know, at one time, it has to be cleaned out.
Right,
So it's not a straight line acceleration or anything, but.
Just some estimate of it so we can plug it in a budget.
No, I think it's a great
Yeah.
suggestion. We've not included it yet.
The other question I have is more specific, and that is, so, I mean, we're interested, in addition to MS4, we're interested in flood reduction. And so one of the things that would help us is if there's a way of estimating the sediment load reduction in particular projects. So for instance, Benbury Francis Way, which is a project we're looking at, what, you know, is there a way to know how much impact that could have And could it substitute for something else? Again, I'm just looking for any kind of hint.
Well, and overlap too, because we're going to get another $1 million come, what, February? So our project, or our goal was to allocate funding for capital projects for flood mitigation. Stream restoration is great for water quality, but doesn't necessarily help for that. So now where is that funding going to come? Because is that considered capital projects if it's not flood reduction? But it is stormwater, so would it come out of our fee then?
I think we need to understand the ballpark costs for this before, we don't even know if we have enough in yearly receipts to fund these projects, and then there would have to be some other funding mechanisms. So I think we need to see the ballpark costs to get a better picture of where we're going.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would assume that we're not going to have enough. That would be my assumption. And I think we're just going to have to look at opportunities for partnerships and grants, as well as there's going to need to be tax dollars put towards some of these things.
And that's maybe a question for the board, is are they going to change what our goal is? Before it was about, 20% for repair replacement, 80% for capital projects. Are the funds going to come elsewhere for the MS4 projects? Or are they going to reallocate and do 20% repair, 40% or, one and 20% for another, just to make up the difference? If not, I agree, there's no way with all these projects in 5 years
And that
it
was
would
touched
ever
on.
pay for it.
That actually, it wasn't discussed, but there was a couple comments from the board on just that, what happens to the 20%, what happens to the, you have a fund balance and you have a revenue of $1 million a year, what if this doesn't cover? I know the manager had said, just threw out there, you could look at a bond issue and use the stormwater fund to do the debt service on the bond issue, and in that way you can get money to do that. There's a lot of ways to do it, but they're all big policy questions for our Board of Commissioners once we get an idea of the magnitude. But I think when you just look at the number of projects, you can see that this is massive.
How are other townships doing this? I just don't get it.
Yeah, I think everyone's in the same boat, yeah. But your point about.
They don't have $1 million
flooding,
fund to play with, do they?
You're in a better position because you're set up with your.
I'm a little bit like Regina. We have $1 million, and so we can spend it. But if people don't have $1 million, they just don't spend it. So
I think there are going to be, at the end of the 5 years, very few municipalities who can say, we met the letter of the law. And I wouldn't be surprised if there were extensions or modifications or
that's an excellent
opportunities
point.
for funding from the state. Who
Because
knows?
you have an unfunded mandate, and that always has been. But the reality of it is, how can, we touched on it early. If we had a huge fund, just physically getting these projects done is going to be a momentous task. And you look at, it's like the stormwater flooding we have. This didn't occur in 5 years. So we're addressing, 100 years worth of issues in what's, a 5 and a year, 5-year plan. I question that myself. How will everybody meet these requirements? I don't know.
Yeah.
So just a point, and then I guess we can move on, is that there is, let's see, I am thinking that the priority seems to be now, well, we have to do MS4 and everything else falls by the wayside. And I think that,
That doesn't need to be the
guess
case at all, because a lot of these projects, like the retrofits and things like that, we could also look at increasing capacity and reducing flooding at that same time.
But those are
flood
relative, we have big impact projects that probably have minimal load reduction that we would want to do. And so the point I'm making is that we want to transmit to the board that it shouldn't be that MS4 drives everything, that there ought to be some way of saying, okay, in 5 years, we're not going to meet the load reduction that you require. We're going to meet 50% of it. That's what we're going to do, because that's all we can do, and meet the other things that we want done. I just don't want to see it all driven by a regulatory requirement from the state.
I don't think it has to be. And I think because I'm on the planning commission and I see the projects that are coming through, I see a lot of opportunities to partner with redevelopment. And I think half of this goes away if we do that. And and the couple that we've asked have all been nodding their heads, sure, let us know. And so when a developer comes in and they're redeveloping a property, it's very inexpensive, and we may pay the additional cost out of the stormwater fee to do that water quality that isn't required currently. But then we get the ordinance passed, and then it becomes required, and then a lot of this goes away. So
Yes.
I think the Board of Commissioners needs to act quickly. No, to move forward with stormwater ordinance regulation changes, because the sooner they put them in place, the sooner we can reap the benefits.
Yeah, agreed. And your point about making decisions earlier between like stream restoration or basin retrofits and the flooding, those projects that capture, the first inch or whatever are going to help with flooding. Nothing we do here is going to tell you the elevations like the CH2 studies, but volume reduction is one of the best ways to bring your overall flooding down. So that intuitively helps more than, say, just stream restoration. So, yeah. So there's a lot here.
Honestly, this is exactly what we were looking for. We were looking for something that would give us the ability to meet the requirements within the 5 years if everything gets funded. And that's a starting point.
Yeah.
Because without this plan, we couldn't honestly submit something to the DEP in good faith.
Right.
And now we can. So we could actually follow this plan and achieve our goals. And that's, more than we could have asked for at this point. I don't know what time you actually got on board. It's kind of...
It's been quick.
It's
But we're really
kind of-
appreciative.
it's kind of
to Steve,
miraculous,
'cause Steve and
actually.
his staff have just scrambled to get us everything to put this together. So we're really appreciative of what Steve and his staff have done.
Mark's a great guy, but I've gotten to know him a lot better than I probably ever would have, but it's
And I crack the whip on people in our office.
Is there any other questions or thoughts? Thank you so much for your input.
Thank you very much.
Mark will be here Monday. Good. All right. Thank you.
So now, we're going to move to the Beverly Francis Windsor project status, review of the design scenarios to date, and discussing what we might possibly recommend from here. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Ian, if you could please put my laptop up on, thank you. So what we had discussed for the board meeting tonight was to take a look back at Banbury, understanding its current situation. And so I sent you folks a bunch of slides, and there was a lot of repeats. The T&M naming and numbering system leaves something to be desired. I don't know how they do it, and I have them all, and it's just a matter of going through them. So what we're going to do is start with, this is Dan Weibel, the CH2M concept plan that the RFP was based on. And you can see, based on what they did, the footprint was not as big as it became in the design. So I guess there's a couple of things we need to think of here. So there's always, we were at 50,000 feet, and we're at about 25,000 feet here. And then when we hit the ground, we saw the huge difference that occurred. And so if you look at this, Dan calculated, or I should say HCH2M, calculated storage quantity. If you look at the drainage area, if I can, so this is we did have a couple resident meetings, and the drainage area, it's pretty densely populated. They're not huge lots. You can see there's a lot of streets. There's the commercial that's there, and obviously the homes. And so let me get back. Maybe not. The next slide, again, is one. So I'm sorry, this one was for the original one that the board approved as far as the magnitude. It was a 25-year, 1-hour storm event. Thank you. Actually, we're at like 40. And the next slide is we have a 10-year event. And you can see, I mean, basically, the configuration is the same. It gets narrower and smaller as we go from the 25 to the 10 to the 5. And this one is the 5.
So Steve, the 25, just so I understand it, if you're going up Windsor, it's the whole street width?
No, it's close to it. Actually, if you look in, like, closer on Dan, they come in a little from the street. The island didn't change. We did not lose the two legs of the pork chop, as we call it. And it pretty much stopped at the bank, at the end of the bank parking lot. It was wide, but each iteration, this is the 10-year I have up, and if you go to if I get up to the 25, again, it gets wider, maybe a little longer, and it goes, if you look on Francis, it goes deeper into the right-of-way. But that basic shape is what he was able to hold. But again, so this was at a high level. So here's the 5-year. And then if you go to so we start looking at the T&M slides. And let me just pull this up for my reference. So from what T&M, what their design told us was, to meet a 25-year, 1-hour event, you were looking at 90,000, 93,000 cubic feet of storage. So as you go through each of these, you can see there's a table here where they're telling us, all right, this one only provided 14,000 cubic feet of storage. We needed 31 to meet this particular storm. And all these iterations we kept going through until eventually they came back to the board and said, we're unable to make this work within the confines of what the RFP was, and we actually did a change order. This was the one I think everybody is very interested in. So this one is the one that took some of the Wawa parking lot, some of the Anthropology parking lot, including the, like, behind the State Store. It went a little further down Francis, yet as you can see, it stays in the right-of-way. What I don't think most folks realized, that right-of-way really went back pretty far on that one corner property.
Steve, are you saying that the entire shaded area in those parking lots is within the township right-of-way?
No, that is completely out of the township
Okay.
right-of-way. So what you see in the parking lots is out of the township right-of-way. So on the slides you're looking at now, this offered the storage we needed. This offered over 93,000 cubic feet. This was going to meet the criteria that the board determined that we should move on, which was a 25-year, 1-hour event. You can see the impact is not huge on the streets. So if you go down to the traffic island, this is now the configuration that shows Windsor Avenue turn and meeting Francis head-to-head. The island becomes storage and a BMP. And if you look, it does not go far back up Windsor at all. It does go up Banbury a little bit, but not a huge amount. So the bulk of that storage is in the right-of-way of Francis, in the street of Francis, and a huge portion is in those private parking lots. Now, you would net out a little bit of easement because we have an existing pipe there. But this is one of the projects that met the criteria.
So Steve, north of the Wawa, the road north, that's in the right-of-way,
So all this where the cursor is,
yeah.
none of that is private property. That's
Okay.
street and right-of-way.
Okay.
Basically, the majority of this is all private property over here.
And this relies on tying in at a different location than currently, right?
Right, you can see over here, Regina, you see their tie-in point? So this was one of the choices that T&M went through. Now we have another one. This only made the 69,000 cubic feet of storage. So it did not meet the full requirement. Where's my other sheet? Pardon me for 1 second while I...
Now, Steve, on the south side of the roadway in the tie-in, that's the only area that's outside the right-of-way?
Right.
That's shaded?
Yes, and as we talked, that's a pretty simple easement to, that's a pretty reasonable
And
easement
it's
to get.
one owner at that point?
Right. And this project, so they're able to obtain 69,000 cubic feet of storage, and by their calculations, that's a 5-year, 1-hour event. And I think the interesting thing to note here, for a 5-year event, the impact is still pretty significant, and it's still the same. I mean, we're basically taking, you lost all the private area here, but we're still going up Windsor. We've addressed the island, Banbury right-of-way, and again, a lot of right-of-way along Francis. But it's got that same shape that Dan originally put forth, and that's for a 5-year event.
And was did they consider that was a lower invert, that connection, and they made it, I don't know that they made the storage areas deeper.
I do not believe they did.
So if you made them a little deeper, you might be able to make them narrower.
Right, and
or get more storage than the 5-year.
We approached T&M on this, and although they did not run through the calcs, anecdotally, as you said, and as we know, you could probably shrink that footprint, because you'll be able to get, because we had really good drainage characteristics here in these soils. The test came up great. So we're not too worried about going deep.
Steve, going up Windsor, where's the end of the parking lot for the bank in these schematics?
Sure, so if you want to look at the one we just looked at, which was the 5-year, this is the bank parcel here, so right where the cursor is, that's roughly the bank, end of the bank parcel.
So you're still going up Windsor.
Right, but we're not going all the way up to farm like we do in later versions. And again, so this one was the 83,000 cubic feet, and then we came down here. Unfortunately, I have to look at my sheets because I can't read the screen and I can't read the, I just want to see the size.
So, Steve, scenario 3 has 2 parts, because it looks like it's 1 of 2, 2 of 2. So it looks like most of it's down at the intersection of Windsor and Banbury, but really, if you flip it, the page, next one,
Okay,
there's the series of beds that go all the way up.
So which one, I'm sorry, I was looking at 2.
Looking at C, right? Concept
Let's
C?
shrink this down.
Scenario 3 was the 83,000, right, that you were mentioning, Steve?
Scenario 2 is 83,000. No, I'm sorry,
No,
concept plan, scenario 3.
Scenario 3 is 83,000, because
83,000.
that's the 10-year, because scenario 2 was 69,000.
Right,
and that was a
83 is the
5-year.
10-year, that's correct.
All right. But it does, I just want to say, it doesn't just end at that intersection. It goes,
No, it does,
scenario 3 still does go up Windsor with
but
the
not
series.
that huge impact that the
Right.
final plan called for.
Just a series of beds. I just want to make sure people
Yes.
saw that next page, that it's just not at the intersection. It still goes up
Right,
Windsor.
so when we go to concept plan, scenario 3, sheet 2 of 2, this is what Heather's talking about. Oh, I went a little too quick, hang on. So they try to limit the disturbance. As you can see, there's pipe, there's beds, pipe, more storage, and that ends up there somewhere around farm. Impact was a little less. The limit of disturbance was still considerable because we went all the way up the street. And like I say, that took us up to Farm Road. That was the longest reach, if you will. The next one is concept plan, scenario 4, 95,189 cubic feet of storage. This is another 2-sheet plan. So the first sheet shows that very basic outline we were looking at, considerable storage along the Francis right-of-way. Minimal over here. We do go up Banbury. Once again, the island is reconfigured. There's storage. It's also a BMP. And then when we go to the next one, it's inclusive of the entire street up to.
Steve, what is the grade area?
That was, on this one, I believe this is the one where we looked at porous paving. So you have porous paving, that was to augment the small storage you had on the side. We had some concerns with that from a utility standpoint and a practicality standpoint. So porous paving, I visited Immaculata College many years ago, and I still go there, and they had a fantastic porous paving job that was pretty old. And they also had one that I don't think was quite as successful, but they were all in parking lots. The farmer's market, which we discussed, the Fuchs office building, there was a porous paving project that the township partnered on. There's some porous paving at the Rosemont Business Campus that the township partnered on. But we don't see it used in streets as often. Not that it can't be, and I'm not trying to be a fuddy-duddy old engineer, not saying that you can't do it. It's just not as common. And there is issues with utilities. Once you're in the street, so the assumption would be either A, you replace your utilities, but when there is a water line leak, a gas line leak, or something to do with the sewer or any other excavation, you're compromising now the bed of that porous paving. And there has to be very specific specifications to put it back so that it's still effective. Like I say, not that it's a bad thing, not if it's something we wouldn't want to consider. The porous paving paths down at Clem McCrone Park are working very well. That specific mix design actually came from Dan Weibel at CH2M Hill. I asked him to provide that to us, which he did. Did a great job on that. So this was definitely a project that was going curb to curb, this scenario. You were going curb to curb.
Hey, Steve, you know what I found that was interesting, and if I'm jumping ahead, I apologize. You have a scenario chart on here with construction costs and storage, and you would have thought that, like, the 25-year storm would have yielded the best cost per storage, which it didn't. Surprisingly, that 10-year was the sweet spot. Is that because for the 25-year, the beds are in the middle of the road and there's utility relocation? Is that why that's more, or is that purely just looking at the stormwater design?
I had T&M, like we were talking about total price, and I had him include the cost of utility relocation.
Okay, so for that, because I don't think you have to relocate the utilities for that 10-year storm. Because for the 10-year storm, they're all like in between the trees, there's a series of little beds.
Very cautiously placed. Because when originally he did it before it went public, it did not include that. And I said, I don't know how the board would fund it, but it would have to be funded, whether the sanitary sewer is redone from the sanitary sewer fund, the O2 fund. Chances are we get Aqua to pay for that. They're in our right of way. But he had to show those costs, and I concur. So the one that we're looking at next would be concept plan scenario 4. I'm sorry, what? This is concept plan scenario 4. This is the one with the porous paving, which we talked about. Not as deep, but definitely still a full width road impact for the residents. This is the chart we've been talking about.
Steve, again, this calculation is with the outlet pipe being high, not low.
That is correct. So we brought this to T&M. They definitely concurred that the footprint would shrink some. I do not have the exact amount. So this was actually the, I'll go through this quickly because this was actually this presentation is an aggregate of some of these slides. The first one, again, so this one is 93,000 cubic feet. This is the one that takes, uses the Wawa State Store Anthropology parking lot.
Hey, Steve.
Yes, sir.
May I ask a question? I attended a meeting with the residents, and you said at that time that you were going to take a different approach. You're going to start with the intersection, see what could be done there, what it would do, and then start to branch out. I don't see that approach at all.
And thank you for bringing that up. So at this point, this was actually on the agenda, and it has come off the agenda, but it will be back on. We have asked the board for direction on Banbury, because the original direction we got was to move forward with the 25-hour, and actually, you know what, I think we should just cut to the chase. Bear with me.
It's back on the agenda for Monday or no?
It is not.
It's for a future, okay.
So this is the plan that was approved by the board. Okay, this is the one that goes all the way up. I'm sorry, this is not. This is the bank one. Let me keep going. This is the plan that was approved by the Board of Commissioners. This is the end that heads up towards farm. This is the base. So if you look at it again, we have considerable storage along the right-of-way of Francis. We use Banbury. The traffic island has been converted. We go, as we start to head up Windsor towards Francis, towards farm, we then convert to a different type of storage, which I'll show you in a second. So Charles, what we talked about that night, there was no decisions made, but so the folks there that were from the area, I'll characterize, were very unhappy with the project, very unhappy with the impact of the project. So as the meeting wound down, we talked theoretically about what you just said, and the area we spoke of, that would be the project, what if the project area was this? So it was Banbury down here and included this. So basically this very specific area. So from 30 down to here, over to here, and back up here. That was what we spoke about. That's exactly what I traced that night on the monitor. But we don't have official word from the Board of Commissioners to move on that. So I have some concepts for that. So what we're going to ask the board is, we still have a contract to complete the original design. And we, the staff, did not have the authority to terminate that contract. So what we're going to be asking the board is, let's please provide us direction. And there's a couple of options. Move forward on the plan as originally determined. Stop work on the plan, and let's move forward on what was discussed that night. And then the board may have other options of their own. So right now, no, we are in a holding pattern. There's no doubt. And this was the area, and we've discussed it via email. There's only so much that can be done in that area. Like I said, we were backing into it instead of saying we wish to address this storm. But I'm hoping we can get creative. I think there's a lot of things we can do. I'd still like to add the parking lot in of the bank because it's outside of the residence.
Yeah, so Steve, two questions.
Yes,
First
sir.
of all, why, in your discussion, and I wasn't at the meeting, why was the storage up Francis eliminated? I mean,
So and that's a great question. So basically, the residents drove what they found acceptable, and I'm going to paraphrase, and I don't mean to speak for them, but 2 or 3 of the comments, and you folks were there, was, we don't want our streets dug up, we don't want you digging up past our houses, we don't want all this activity. So I was trying to find a common ground, and if I stayed in here, I wasn't digging past anybody's house, I wasn't, stopping all their access. That was very clear that for the few folks that spoke on that, and obviously that's their opinion, and they have maybe have a different perspective, that they did not want their streets dug up. And the previous plan, we
Well,
were
Steve-
basically going to remove us.
Steve, I didn't get the impression that they didn't want their streets dug up. It was the whole combination of digging up all the streets.
Yes.
As wide as it was, destroying the trees as they would have been, as many trees as we're talking about, they're all old growth trees. And basically, the township hit them with this is what we're going to do. And what came out of this is they said, wait a minute, what happens? How much storm can you control if you only start with the intersection area?
I took
Well,
it differently. I took it as, we don't want you up and down.
Yeah,
Some of the folks did not want us going up and down the streets.
Look,
That's why I
nobody,
ended up
it's
here.
not in my backyard. It's, nobody's going to want anything. But if we could have led the residents into explaining what we were trying to do, and you proposed starting with the intersection and seeing how far we could get, what it would do for us. Could we add the bank?
I'd
What
love
would
to add
that
the
do
bank.
for us? Could we add the road section of
Francis.
Francis? What would that do for us? Banbury, we get a road section of Banbury. We're not killing lots of trees yet, and what does that do for us? So these are the types of questions that these residents would like to have had answered. They didn't want to approve this large project that took out all their trees and dug up all their roads and so on, without knowing what else was possible. This is an enormous
So-
amount of money and work. in this area.
I mean, I guess I'm hearing two different versions of the meeting, and I wasn't there,
I
but
think it's one and the same. It just, so.
they didn't, so they had an all or nothing thrown at them.
Well, I mean, it was many people at the meeting, so some folks did not want to do anything. Others were definitely amenable to doing something. Other folks did not want this impact. And I had the arborist report there. Some trees, there's no doubt, were going to be lost. Some would stay. And Charles is dead on, though, that the impact was basically from Windsor, from Farm to the intersection. All these streets were going to be torn up, and that was a lot for some folks to take. I can say that was my perception. If I'm wrong, I apologize.
I have to, but I just have to say, this summer, the gas company came up my street, and nobody asked me, they just did it. And they did go near the roots of my front trees, and they didn't ask me that they were going to cut them up. So I was very nice that the township asked the residents, but I do think there is this aspect of it is a right of way.
Paul,
And I guess I'm
you're
struggling
You're
with it.
getting the wrong impression. This is
Okay.
what happened. This project went down the wrong path. It got over-designed due to the board's input without the thought of the impacts down the road and up the road and all over the road. And there was no public involvement in the process, which is a huge mistake, and I don't know how that even happened. This project is in a neighborhood. And if you're going to do a project in a neighborhood, you can absolutely not expect to get the public input after you've already made all the decisions and expect people to buy in. It's
Yeah,
never
but
going to
there-
happen.
But there also comes a point.
So if you tell me you're going to take 2 years and you're going to tear down every tree in my neighborhood, and there was also a misunderstanding of what would be achieved as the outcome. Some people thought it was still going to flood 5 times per year. So that was a big misperception that was out there. So you've done all this work and it's still going to flood 5 times a year. That was the impression some people had. And you're spending my tax dollars on a project that's ridiculous. That was the impression some people had. So if you take a step back and you talk to the people, they're willing to understand the project. They want to see some progress. They want to see it move in a direction that makes more sense. Not only at a cost, but as an impact to their neighborhood, the timeline, the loss of trees. The main complaints were, we have heritage trees you're going to tear out, and to what end? And there's no reason those heritage trees need to be torn out, and there's no reason it needs to take 2 years of construction in their neighborhood.
Let's be clear. It wasn't 2 years of construction.
That was the perception
Right, but
of the neighbors.
it was a construction season. And actually, our arborist came through and noted that a lot of the trees would be unaffected. And I had the report there. And to Regina and Charles' point, I think the three of us all heard many things and were repeating the bits and pieces. There was a lot of people there. There were some people that were totally against it. I think some people were amenable to it. I think some people were in the middle of the road. Not yes, not no. But everything that's been brought up it is true. Folks are like, hey, I'm going to have trouble. We're going to get you to your house, but it's going to be a pain in the neck for 9 months or a year with all this going on.
But every project, that's going to happen with
Absolutely.
every project. Every project is, if we're going to do it in a township public right-of-way, there's somebody who's not going to be happy. So at some point in time, either we move forward with the project, and I'm not saying we shouldn't involve the residents. We absolutely should. But at some point in time, we have to say, look, this is a project that not only reduces flooding locally, but we picked it because it reduced flooding downstream. This is a project that we will do whatever measures it takes, construction sequencing or whatever, to protect as many trees as possible. But if you look at the scenarios, the 5 and 10-year storms have the little beds in between trees, which I think would raise the percentage of losing that tree as opposed to that 25-year storm. All the seepage beds are in the middle of the road. So I think you're going to get more flood reduction, less tree disturbance, and go forth with what we recommended and what the board recommended was to do a 25-year storm, even from a cost perspective point. That's why I asked, I was surprised to see that the 25-year was more than a 10-year, but that's because it included construction and relocation of brand-new utilities for that road. So yes, it's inconvenient, and I've been living with Conestoga construction for 2 years now. So I know it stinks, but they're gonna have brand-new, what could have water lines, sewer lines, flood. Street.
Brand new road.
If for some reason a trees have lost, we will make sure that they not only get what they had, but something, maybe a step up, that we're not trying to destroy their neighborhood, but we have to start moving forward with projects that are within the township's purview, that we own the land. It's going to be flood reduction that's uphill, and it's going to serve not only locally, but residents downhill. What are we supposed to say to the people downhill who are flooding that this could help them? And well, we don't want it in our neighborhood. We don't want to deal with it. I feel for the residents. I've been living with the construction for 2 years, and it's terrible. But we're not going to let it run amok. We will follow through with this project. And I think we should really move forward with what we recommended to the board. Because
We recommended a 15 to
we recommended
10 to
Recommend
15.
what the board approved.
No, we
And
didn't.
I'm
I
sorry, we
don't,
recommended
I don't
15.
support the project as it stands, and if it was in my neighborhood, I'd be your biggest complainer. Because
it's
I
gonna
would-
happen in every
Because I would be
neighborhood, though.
telling you that it's not practical what's being proposed, it's not necessary what's being proposed. What needs to be done is 10-year or less storm needs to be managed. This is a
But look at
local
the
road.
difference in volume between the 10 and the 25-year storm.
It's a local road, and you don't need to design for a 25-year storm.
But it's helping flooding downstream.
Actually not. It's the same amount of flow post and pre-construction because you have the limiting pipe. That one pipe controls what goes downstream, and you're not changing that. What you're changing is, right now, the ground is your detention basin. In the future, underground is your detention basin. That's the difference. And you'll have some infiltration, yes, and it will, it won't change the flooding. It might help with the stream, because downstream, far downstream, will stop releasing flow a little sooner because we infiltrated some of that instead of sending it through the pipe. But the peak storm won't be impacted.
Just a couple comments on the meeting. I think at the end of the meeting, there was, and I think everyone has said it was true of what happened there. But I thought there was a discussion that, there's two ways that this could be approached. One, the way that it was approached, that it's a design storm. And the other way would be saying, hey, we've got this much area to work with, let's back into it. And those were the two different design approaches.
Yeah, but there's a third. I mean, the question of easements with the bank, I guess I'd like to hear a little bit about that, Steve. I mean, what is involved with that? And why isn't that being considered?
I thought that was uphill elevation, though.
Well, no.
I don't understand what the bank's going to achieve. It's a way above.
No, the bank was and actually, it's a great idea. If you go out there, there's a considerable conveyance of stormwater runoff in the north gutter, the westbound lane. And the idea was to capture and convey that before it got to Banbury and made the turn, and put it and treat as much as you could in the bank parking lot. So if you were standing facing west at the intersection of Banbury and 30, and you're on 30 facing west, in a big storm coming from Connor's Pharmacy and all that coming down, that gutter is 2 feet wide and 8 inches deep. And as it gets to Banbury, a lot of that makes a turn. So the idea was to try to capture that. I met with PennDOT out there. I met with a couple of the drainage folks. they're fine letting us do it because it wouldn't be for them, nothing fancy, drop a couple of inlets, some pipe, and get that water into a system or systems in the bank. Does that relieve all the flooding? No, but that's a component that gets reduced going to Banbury. And we talk about addressing runoff before it gets to the point of interest. And this was one way, although be it close to the point of interest, to do that. So to Mr. Bergmeyer's comment, so basically when the Board of Commissioners directed us to move forth on this scenario, that's what we moved forth on. And like I say, as much that came out of that meeting, we can't change that until the board gives us further direction.
So when you go before the board, or I don't know who's going before the board, but how do we let them understand there are all these options? Because I've heard a bunch of options here. Are we going to have a list and saying how much water we can retain?
My memo
or?
was strictly based on the meeting.
Oh, no,
Yeah.
I understand that. I understand that. But I'm saying that right now sounds too limiting in terms of what could be done. So when we go before the board, we want to present all the options, including up Francis Way, including the bank,
And
whatever else
they've
can be
seen
done.
just everybody's seen all these options. You folks, the board.
Well, no, for instance, I mean, the lowered pipe has not been
Right.
designed yet.
No,
The bank
there
has
is
not been included.
No authorization to do
I hear
work.
that, but I'm saying if we go back to them, we got to give them those options.
Well, I think that would be, I can put that in the memo. My memo was very brief in that it said, do we move forward? Do we terminate the contract? And then there was this big open end, other options. And everything that everybody had said from Charles to Regina and all, are the other options. If you want, I can, for when this, I'm assuming it's going to go in the first or second meeting in September, I will make that request. I can list all these things. I can take a memo from this commission, however you want to do it.
Steve, excuse me, but if I'm the board, and those are the three options I'm given, I want to move the project forward. I'm going to vote to move it forward, and I think all the board members are too, because they've already voted that it should move forward. And yet, you have presented an improper approach. I mean, you've not given them what they need to know.
My assumption is, Charles, that the ad infinitum scenarios everybody has seen. And that doesn't mean because I didn't list them, they won't be discussed. But the board went through all these presentations and they made a judgment at one particular evening to pick a specific project. They had all the information you did. So this is, all the things we went through are nothing new. Everybody has seen them once or twice. I would verbally say there's other options that we can pursue. And you know what? Some of the other options might not even look like this.
But
there's things we can do.
Steve, the difference is that the board didn't seek the residents' input and didn't understand the big pushback. So now it's going back. Somebody has to go back and say, here, and then maybe this says us, just to make a list of, here's the possibilities, here's the cost, and here's the volume we can retain. I mean,
well, what I could do is, in the memo, I could basically include, not all these slides, the single slides that show, so this is what we have data for. I can say, here were the past iterations. Here's our chart showing rough costs, storage, and then there's always an in-between. So you don't have to have, if everything is a 5-year storm where we have all these nice numbers, we don't have to meet the 10-year requirement. We can meet in between a 5 and a 10. It can be a 7. So I can very easily compile all these, or if the committee wants to, however you want to work it, I'll work it your direction.
Well, I guess the question that I have for our committee members is, almost what, $100,000 has been spent on design to get to this point?
We are close.
So, and it's not that I don't want to listen to the residents, but just looking at that intersection, to me, I think it's going to be a harder path to go, and it's going to be a waste of design time and money, and slow this project down and throw more options in that are going to confuse everyone. I just don't think the benefit in doing that.
What would happen is we'd have to, so T&M has a contract to work on the specific scenario. If we are to go elsewhere, I have to go back to them for a proposal to go to the board, and I need the board's approval to do that. So I mean, I see where the commission, the Stormwater Management Advisory Committee wants to go. I'll work at your direction. I don't disagree with Charles. I left it as A, B, or everything, and everything is included here. I can list this. It can come from you folks. There are in-betweens. You could take each one of these scenarios and take a piece of it, and you, for lack of a better term, you have this amalgam of different things. I'm not sure the storm that would come up with, but you can do pieces of this, whatever you want to do.
I think we need to stop with all the options and we need to move forward. I mean, we could keep going through options.
I think
So
what
what's
makes
this
more
board
sense.
recommending?
I think what makes more sense is to make a determination as to what we need in concept to happen here. We need to reduce flooding. How much do we need? We need to limit the impacts. What do we need to limit? Is it the heritage trees? Is it the construction time? Is it the fact that no one's looked into easements that could avoid all that construction on the areas where it's being constructed? I don't know how viable it is to do something in the bank, but is the bank going to be interested in doing such a thing? Maybe some of those questions can be asked prior to discussing this. Well, we've gone to the bank. They're absolutely not going to let us have an easement. That's off the table. Or the bank said, bring us some plans and we'll talk.
I wouldn't go to the bank without board's permission. I would not just solicit
I'm saying
that.
before we go to a new design.
And I think that would be part of the board's directive to us.
So the thing is, right now, if you show all these, I mean, I don't even know what I would do with this if I was on the board and I got all these scenarios. I wouldn't even know what to
I'm looking for
think.
some direction from the committee too. So I'm trying to put all the different things out there.
Well, I think first of all, we have to let the board know that this project has a major negative impact on the residents and they're strongly opposed to it. Secondly,
But that shouldn't drive the project. And
I-
right
I'm-
now,
I don't agree with the
feel like
project
it's
either.
driving this project.
I didn't put this project forward as it's designed. I don't support it. I don't.
Could I
I
ask,
think
so
that
We're
the
on
impacts
the,
and the
I mean,
costs are too high.
we had originally said 10 to 15-year storm. That was our recommendation back in December. That's
Did
what we
anyone
said.
tell you that they were going to take down heritage trees all throughout the neighborhood? Did
No.
anyone tell you that there's absolutely no support from the neighbors? Those things were not, that's new information to us.
Well, can
So
I
that
ask-
changes things.
Can I ask something of the committee? So I'm getting mixed direction. So what I would ask you is, I will gladly pen a memo, a draft, and send it to you but I need direction from the committee as how you would want me to put this forward.
All right, Steve, first of all, are you totally dismissing what you told the residents you would do? Starting with the
No,
intersection going out?
I'm a
It
man
sounds
of-
to me like you are.
No, I'm a man of my word. And at the board meeting, this topic of working in this area was going to, just because I mean, my memos are brief if you look at them. And I expand on them verbally. And this is what we would get into. And Commissioner Higgins was there. You were there, Regina Page. And that would come out. I was not about to let this go. And I think actually in the memo, I mentioned an area prescribed by Banbury down to Francis, to the bank and up. So I did talk about that. And as a matter of fact, I will provide the memo to the committee. That was, well, it was published, it was public, then it was pulled. So I'll provide it to you folks. But Charles, this was in my memo, what we talked about that night.
Okay, I guess where I'm coming from is that we're sort of in a tough spot because we've promised the residents a certain approach. And you, representing the township, said we're going to do this.
No, I said, this is something I think we should pursue because I always, Charles, I always quantify it with, it has to come from the board. The board has to give us that. Even though Commissioner Higgins was there's 6 other board members, and we actually discussed that. I said, this is my intent to do, and because it will cost no money, I will work with T&M to come up with those 3 scenarios. There's no doubt about that, but they're only going to be very conceptual.
I'm
So-
confused as to what the 3 are.
That's because we didn't give them to you that night. We basically said, here's an area that everybody seemed to agree that we could work. And I said, how about if we come up with 3 scenarios at a very high level? Because to your point, we don't want to get too detailed, because if you get too detailed, we're precluding the public input. So we keep it at a high level and say, we're looking at doing X in this location. And this is the location. This is exactly what I did that night. I traced this area with my cursor. So if we blow this up, now, I can tell you one of my versions in my head is to capture runoff here, either take it to the bank or take it down to this area. Now, there were some comments that folks did not like this new traffic configuration. So one of the items might be you keep it as it was and you work you could still use the whole area, but there'd be paving over that part.
I thought public safety said that this is a dangerous situation the way it is now, and that it should be redesigned.
From a traffic standpoint, this is the better method. But
Is it just a better way of doing it, or should it be redesigned because it's dangerous?
Charles, I don't recall that part, honestly. I can find that out, but I don't recall the dangerous portion. And you may be perfectly right, I just don't recall it.
So I guess my question is, that's one scenario where you utilize some space at the bank and the area that you traced. That's one scenario. What are the other two?
Like I said, what I told them was, I didn't have them that night, and I did not pursue them yet with T&M. I can tell you what I'm running through my mind, which may or may not. So this area of Banbury here, okay, is not in front of anybody's house. It's only in front of the Wawa. So in my mind, that is ripe for storage. The gas company's going to be coming through here. I've already asked them to move the gas line as far east as they can to hug this curb to try to give us as much room as we can. We have an existing system down here. So do we bypass that? Do we connect? Does that become part of that? Or do we go in another method? You can do, and again, aside from the 3, there's various things. You can keep this type of configuration. You all know you can get very creative in that triangle. I mean, it's only so much storage space, but you can get creative how you do that. This is where the deeper would come in. But in my email to you folks, I said, we're backing in, because I'm not telling you, hey, we're going to design to a 5-year storm. I'm telling you, I have a specific limit of disturbance.
So, I mean, Regina's point about 3, you don't really have 3, you just have, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I do have a suggestion after this. You're saying this is what I got, is this one thing?
No, what I said was, I will come back to everybody, if I'm authorized, with 3 options for this area. I did not give them the 3. I'm not giving you the 3 options. I don't have them.
So let me back that out a little bit so we can see more.
Oh, sure.
I mean, just to move this forward, why don't we say a little bit more? No, I'm sorry, the other way.
You said back out, my mistake.
Yeah, back out, okay. So right there, why can't that be what we recommend? It's designed, and then find out if you can do the bank, and that would be what we propose.
What year storm is that? I can't see the.
Well, actually, this is, so we got to go back to the,
It's
Well,
about-
no,
it's
I'm
about a-
saying
it's
take
about-
away
it's
number
about-
2.
it's
Take
about a
away
5-year
2.
storm. It's about a 5-year storm.
If you
So
do that
this is-
without the stuff up the street?
this is concept plan scenario 2.
C is a 5-year, yeah.
Concept plan scenario 2 provides you with,
Yeah, it's 5, no,
69,000.
yeah, it's a
So
5-year.
just, I mean, just by looking at the data we have, and,
so you have 70,000 cubic feet of storage with, Paul, this is what you were looking at on a different plan, but that's what this is.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, and so
5-year
I'm
storm.
saying, go there, investigate the bank, and then the question is, what does the lower outlet do for you? That's really all I see, because it's all in the right of way, it's not going up the street that far. Yeah, it's going to destroy some trees, but it's not going to have the major impact that was going on before, so I'm saying,
but
go with
that's,
this.
but that scenario does look like it is going up the street, doesn't
No, I'm
that?
saying just stop right here.
I think you stop right there and you're ending up doing a 5-year storm, no matter what option you pick. I mean, at this point, I really feel like You're grasping at straws. You're
This is a
you're
five-year
grasping
storm.
at straws
five-year
as to, well, maybe we can do this and maybe we can do the bank. So if we're not in a rush and we don't want to do this and we want to wait another 2 years, we can grasp at straws. Are we going to move forward? Or are we going to grasp at straws that this might work or that might work? We have a plan that works. The board approved it.
Madam Chairperson, could I make a suggestion? Because again, I'm getting
Yeah,
mixed,
I don't feel like we're getting anywhere.
I'm getting
in our
mixed
discussion.
direction.
Well, yeah, we haven't decided
If,
anything.
so
Yes,
if-
that's just me speaking,
If
yes.
the SWIM Act, if you folks move and take a vote to direct me to pursue X, Y, or Z, I can do that. Or if you want to pen a memo to the board directing X, Y, and Z.
Well, currently, this isn't on the agenda until September, you're saying?
It was removed, so my guess is it'll be the first or second meeting in September.
So why don't we continue this to our next meeting and have some, like, feedback in between now?
But your next meeting is after the first meeting of the...
Yeah, so have it at their second meeting.
That's not my call, Regina. I make the request. I don't
Well, I
necessarily...
mean, because right now, we don't have clear,
I don't think we're going to come to any consensus tonight.
I think if we get more information between now and then, we can have communication back and forth
Yeah,
and have a
but
clearer picture.
What more information are we going to get? We can't do anything until the board approves and gives Steve the go-ahead to talk to the bank, to pay T&M to do extra things. I don't see what additional information we're going to get in next month's meeting. What'll happen is, if we decide that we want Steve to exercise those options, he's going to go to the board in September, because it's not going to make our meeting. It'll be the second meeting. They'll think about it through October. Come November, we might get some feedback, which would be really fast. And now we're into December, and we still are spinning our wheels with this project. I really don't think that
All
we're
I
going
can
to
say
gain
is
that
there's no
much.
way I could support the project as it was approved by the board with the resistance from the residents that is very valid. And so if you're saying you have to have a decision tonight, I would say rescope the project. Go into the board and say, this project can't move forward as it is now. We need to rescope it. We need to get some more information from T&M. First of all, if that outlet goes lower, what does it do for us? Second of all, can we have those easements? And third of all, what other options can we add to the mix, like you were saying, find other ways, maybe within that parking lot? Because you can take more of that parking lot. If you have an amenable partner there, you could take more of that parking lot and less of that roadway. You know, there's...
I'm in favor of what Regina's proposing. I think that we should, our recommendation...
Because it can't move forward as is.
Right, that we...
It can.
No, it really
No,
can't. It's
No,
ridiculous.
it's not, because I think.
If you feel it has to move forward as is, I can't support that, and that's not why I'm on this committee, and that would go completely against why I volunteer here. So I can't support that.
And I'm not saying I want to rush this through, but what I don't want to see is that because the residents don't want this project, that this project doesn't go forward, because we're setting a very bad precedent.
No,
You're really kind of pinning this as a NIMBY situation, which it's not.
It's not. I totally agree.
So it's really not the residents that are at fault here.
Yeah,
They're
I
not-
want
it's
to
not
blame,
us. That's not
I
what
want
I'm
to blame
saying.
us.
It's not
The
what I'm saying.
township, the board,
Right.
and us,
That we
and the
did not-
consultant, all of us, every party involved, other than the neighbors, is at fault here.
Because
And
we
I'll
didn't
take
ask the
ownership on
neighbors.
that, because it did not go the way it should have gone. And for whatever reason, we are where we are today, and there's only one way to fix it, and it's to go back to the drawing board. And if otherwise, I would say the project shouldn't move forward.
So what would a letter to the BOC look like from your perspective, Regina?
Well, I think we're just supporting Steve in going back to them and describing the situation, because there's the one commissioner who was there, but the rest of them who were not. And I think it may not even be on their radar at this point.
But I think it is. He sent a note to them.
I
And
don't think it's on the radar. I think if we do send a note to them, it has to be very specific. It has to say, we cannot support this project in its current form, period. And it should be stopped. We should not take it any further, and we should go back, and then we can list the reasons why. But that's really, you've got to be very, very specific and direct. See, otherwise, nobody is going to listen, frankly.
I'm in favor of that. I have to leave.
That's why I'm saying, if it has to be on the first meeting, then we have to do this through email.
So,
I mean, that's what it
yeah.
has to be.
That's not-
Or you can have a subcommittee handle it, because there's no way that we can do this tonight.
Well, I'd rather see it pushed back one meeting than for, because I won't vote for it not to go forward with this. I just think that there has to be, if there's some due diligence to talk to the bank, that's one thing. But to pay TNM, who's already spent $100,000 on scenarios, and it was our fault that we didn't get the residents involved sooner. I mean, I agree with you. But are we not going to go forward with the project because of that?
Well, it isn't just
It is,
no, no, no,
because
no,
this
no, wait.
project was moving
It isn't
forward
the
until that.
residents per se, it's the damage it'll do to the neighborhood that we didn't consider, that the Board of Commissioners didn't consider. It's not
That
just
we
the
weren't made
neighborhood's
aware of.
opinion. Well, I mean, it's
We
part
weren't
of our.
we weren't made aware of those impacts
We
at the
do
time.
have, you know, I'll take blame. We do have the responsibility of interfacing with the public. We've done that with other people coming to us. You know, I mean, Joe, who's not here, wrote in an email, this was our issue. We could have had the residents come and explain what it was and avoided this if we had had that discussion. We could have helped the discussion along. So I do look
We
at
weren't
it.
invited to the public meeting, honestly. The first public meeting that this was presented at, we weren't invited to. We didn't even know it occurred. Then they had a second public meeting with the same issues on the table, none of them resolved. And now we're going to have a third time where nothing has moved. The needle hasn't moved at all. And we haven't made any progress.
But we would all agree, I think, that if we reduce this to a 10 or 15-year storm, we wouldn't be having this discussion.
A lot of these problems go away.
Is that our recommendation?
That
not
was
saying
our
it would-
original
I
recommendation.
know, but do we go back and reiterate, our original recommendation was 10 to 15-year storm
With a different invert,
with it, yeah.
with a different
But
invert.
just so we're clear, before we start getting feedback back to the residents, if you look at the plans for a 10 or 15-year storm, there are still seepage beds that are going up their street that are, to me, in fact, look closer to trees than the 25-year storm where the seepage beds are in the middle of the road. So if they're really worried about saving these heritage trees, intermingling all these beds super close, which it looks like to these trees, in my mind, I'd rather see the bed in the street.
If they can put it in the bed in the street for a 25-year storm, they can put the bed in the street for a 15-year storm.
May I make a suggestion with all due respect? So I think we learned a great takeaway, and you've all noted it, that, you know, perhaps the public participation should have been early on. Aren't we going down that road again by picking a new project? So,
That's why I'm saying we need to,
wouldn't
we
we
need to
wanna-
give direction to the board
And
that
then
we
bring the
need
folks
to
back in.
redirect the project in a manner that addresses flooding without the huge impacts to the neighborhood.
I think we need another meeting to discuss it. I really do. Because I think if we're going to go and put something to the board, we need to have a much better plan than just the discussion we've had. I wouldn't feel comfortable and want to put Steve in a position where we're back and forth, we don't agree, we absolutely need to agree, so we could give Steve direction to go. Because if we're just throwing out scenarios, I think we're just chasing our tail.
and I'll do whatever the committee wants.
I
you
think,
know
I
that.
think we need another
Heather-
meeting to discuss it.
We need another meeting. We're not going to come to any sort of consensus.
So I will make the
We can stay
request,
here all-
and it's only a request, that we go to the second meeting, which then gives the SWIMAC a chance to meet and make a recommendation prior to the board's meeting, the Board of
Okay, so
Commissioners meeting.
this will be the primary item on our next, agenda then.
Thank you, Paul.
The only other thing I would ask too is that if, depending on what else you're going to put on the agenda, that sometime soon, we should talk about the stormwater ordinance, because there was a lot of action that
That has to be on our next
that
agenda,
has to
absolutely.
also be on our list,
That will be
because
on there too.
I think these really are the two hot topics, are the stormwater ordinance revisions that they received a lot of comments from Jim Higgins, from Maya, there's, I think, some Gannett Fleming. And in addition, we had early comments a couple years ago for an interim that I think could be applied to this. So I would
So-
ask that for the next meeting.
Okay, so we'll have those two as the major ones.
Madam Chair, if I just, so I'm correct, so we're going to request that the board not consider Banbury until the second meeting in September.
That's
So that
correct,
SWIMAC
yes.
can meet and provide their recommendation.
Yes,
Thank you.
yeah.
Just agreeing.
You have a calendar up there?
Oh, yeah, the next meeting is, hold on. So we meet on September 14th, which is a Thursday. So the board meets what, the 11th and the 25th of September? Because they're second Monday and fourth, right? Or are they first and third Monday?
So I have the 25th, so.
Right, the
We have
25th.
time for the Stormwater Management Advisory Committee to meet, make a recommendation, to put it in a memo, or however we do that, and put it in the packet.
But we need to get that to you pretty quick, right?
Very, very quick.
Like, the next day is the 15th, and that's only about a week before.
Yeah.
We'll write on the fly there. Okay, seeing as though we've run over and one of our members had to leave, I think we'll probably adjourn this unless anyone else has any other items. Okay, meeting adjourned.